German prosecutors have applied for an arrest warrant against Markus Jooste after he failed to show up for his criminal trial in Germany yesterday. Jooste's defense team says a deal with the Justice Department prevented him from being in attendance. While there's an arrest warrant, it may take weeks, though, before this matter can be finalised. Let's now speak to political and economic analyst Khaya Sithole. Thank you so much, Khaya, for your time this afternoon. Some say the wheels of justice move painfully slowly, but do you think that this latest installment of the Steinhoff saga and the talk of an arrest warrant might mean that Jooste is close to appearing in that German court, or are we still a long way off?
Good afternoon to the viewers. So the way it was supposed to have worked this week is that he was supposed to have appeared in court. He didn't show up, and he cited some very strange story about issues relating to his particular passport. So that is how he managed not to be in court this week. And since then, the German authorities have then said, well, we're going to have to drag him to court. So the intention was always for the trial to start this particular week in the German court system. And had that happened, we would at least have a full insight into what the charge sheet is and whether he was going to plead guilty or not. So we've been denied that opportunity by his inability to show up, which is something that would eventually be corrected by the Germans, whether they have to drag him from South Africa or if he voluntarily takes himself there.
And given the blame game that has been happening when it comes to this particular passport, the authorities saying, no, we don't have your passport, the lawyer saying, but, he surrendered the passport and all of that. Do you think that he may just go down without a fight, or is he likely to fight? And we may then see this becoming a protracted extradition process?
Well, he's definitely going to fight, and you can imagine that a person in his position will feel that he has nothing to lose, so he can drag the system for as long as he can. He's already benefited from the 6-year lethargy in the processes where all of this happened in 2017, and he still really hasn't been tried for anything. So, of course, you can imagine that his legal advisors are going to advise him to explore whatever avenues he can to avoid or to delay that particular process. And, of course, if the Germans are able to then convince the South African government that, look, he must be extradited, for example, then that is the process that is beyond his control. But for as long as he can push the envelope a bit further, we expect that's what he's going to do, because criminals tend to have a habit of doing that.
And Khaya, I mean, this matter has now once again, in all the many years it's been going on, put the spotlight once again on the National Prosecuting Authority and how the process has been some say very slowly unfolding there, but the NPA over time has been talking about how complex financial crimes are to resolve. But are they really that complex that it could take this long for us to see any movement in this regard?
So there is a problem of the NPA, and that is a problem of ambition. And when we talk about the problem of ambition, it is very clear that the NPA wants to put together the perfect indictment in relation to Markus Jooste. The NPA will never be able to put a perfect indictment in relation to Markus Jooste, because I can guarantee you now, even today, the NPA doesn't actually have a full story or a full understanding of what actually happened at Steinhoff. So the view that they've taken is that until they can find the ability to understand the entire spectrum of events and transactions that happened, then they're not going to put the case together. And that is quite unfortunate. The Germans, on the other hand, seem to have narrowed themselves down to the issues that are very clear and then can be canvassed in court and said, well, we're going to take him down for this one. They haven't tried to be as ambitious as the NPA has been.
So, Khaya, then what does it mean for the NPA, given what you've just explained? Because it really sounds then like this is still a long way off as far as they're concerned.
Well, yeah, I mean, the NPA needs to know its ambition. So if you think about what has happened in South Africa, Markus Jooste actually has been held accountable by the other agencies. The JSE has actually banned him from being a director for 20 years, and they also levied a fine of 15 million rand. So they've done all they can with the instruments they have at their disposal. The Reserve Bank has actually frozen its assets, and of course that is subject to other matters, particularly criminal matters, being resolved. So they've done all they think they could have done. The Financial Sector Conduct Authority is probably the one that has done the most work, because they actually levied a fine of 162 million rand based on what he had done. So you'd imagine that if those three agencies have said that, look, we've looked at the data, we've looked at the information, and we feel that not only does he have a case to answer, but we've also found him guilty, you'd imagine that that would have made the work of the NPA easier. It's not very clear why the NPA has not been able to say, well, if the JSE has somehow managed to complete a process that says that you are guilty of falsifying financial statements and they've levied a fine and a ban, that itself is a case on its own that we can pursue. it's not very clear why, if the Financial Sector Conduct Authority has said that there were definitely elements of insider trading and they've levied a fine of 162 million, which was subsequently revised down, that on its own builds a case. So the lethargy or the inactivity of the NPA is becoming remarkably difficult to explain or to justify, and the only explanation one can offer is that they are trying to build together the perfect charge sheet, which is something that I don't think they'll ever be able to perfect.
And I suppose, some could even say that it may appear as if, given what is unfolding there, it may not be a priority for them. Some may even argue that. But what does this then do when it comes to reassuring the public, that the rich and the powerful, who are also possibly outside of government, whether they escape justice for their crimes with so much ease? What does it do to an ordinary South African who's watching this particular standoff saga unfold, and how the NPA, as you say, keeps on waiting for this particular perfect moment, which, as you say, it may not even have?
So the irony here is that the NPA has a legitimacy crisis based on what has happened in the past, before the times of Shamila Patohi and Ms. Cronje, who subsequently left. So this was an organization that you would have thought that if an opportunity presents itself for it to re-establish itself as an agency that pursues all the powerful without fear or favor, they would have capitalized on that opportunity. They haven't done so. And unfortunately, given the scale of the crime and the scale of the fraud relating to the Steinhoff scandal, you'd have thought that that on its own would have created a sense of urgency from the NPA to say, well, we need to be able to do something here, so that if nothing else, it deters other rogues like Markus Jooste, who may be looking at this and saying, well, actually, if I can get away with it, South Africa is probably never going to catch me. And even if I get caught, the NPA is not going to do much to me. So it is unfortunately escalating a pre-existing legitimacy crisis where people are gradually losing faith in the NPA. And this isn't the only case where they seem to either be unable to act, or when they do act, they seem to do so prematurely, it actually kills off the case from inception. So we do have to be very anxious about the capacity of the NPA to deal with white-collar crimes in particular, because that seems to be where the biggest gaps are. That seems to be where the biggest sense of lethargy seems to be, where the NPA just doesn't seem to know how to pursue this case with the sense of vigor that is necessary. In the Steinhoff case, there has been one particular shift in that they did argue that they didn't have the internal resources and capacity, but that created a new scandal where Steinhoff itself said, well, we're going to make funds available to assist in the process. And that already created conflicts of interest, and we do not know how the NPA has advanced, even when they've been, the funds have been advanced to the criminal justice system in order to assist the Steinhoff case.
Especially when you look at the fact that even, now there's still a lot of concern even around the slow pace when it comes to some of the cases emanating from the Zondo Commission's report.
Yeah, so you would have thought also with what we anticipated from the Zondo Commission. Remember, the NPA actually even sent someone on a watching brief, what they call the watching brief. The irony, of course, is that the person that they sent on a watching brief turned out to be a criminal himself who was working for the NPA. But that being said, you would have thought that the point of putting together a watching brief is to be able to say that as soon as the Zondo Commission is finalized and as soon as it issues this report, that becomes a springboard from which the NPA can then do its job. There were some remarkably easy cases that were presented in front of the Zondo Commission that don't require much from the NPA in order for it to put together a case. If you look at the case of Yake Kwinana and her lawyer and Anonzanza Memela, for example, it was a very clumsy attempt at criminality in that you could clearly see where all the missteps were, where all the fraudulent activities were. And yet since that day, which was actually in 2019, nothing much has been heard from the NPA, except other agencies have tried to act, but the NPA doesn't seem to even be tackling the simplest of the cases that we saw in front of the Zondo Commission.
And Khaya, is it, I know you talked about the issue of, raising concerns around the capacity, but is it a capacity issue only, or is there other things at play here? A lack of political will, a lack of will to do this, or is it only just capacity issues?
Well, I suppose it must be primarily a capacity issue, because I cannot find the political dimension behind the unwillingness to prosecute Markus Jooste. In relation to the Zondo Commission cases, you could argue that perhaps the political willingness is what's missing. But the NPA isn't just failing in relation to those cases. It is failing everywhere you look. So there's definitely a question of the capacity issue there. And in previous budget statements, we've heard that the state is trying to put together additional resources to assist organizations like the NPA and like SARS to be able to sort of do their job a bit better. an organization like SARS is in a much better position to explain what they've done with the additional resources that they keep getting from the state. The NPA, on the other hand, it becomes very difficult to sort of map the relationship between the additional resources that they've been asking for and in some cases been given versus the outcomes. And of course, whether the criminal justice system takes 10 or 15 years to finalize cases, the most important step is to start. And that's where we seem to find the NPA lacking.
Job, I would have hoped that maybe we end this off on a bit more positive note, but hey, it does look like there's going to have to be a lot that is done here to ensure that the wheels of justice turn a bit more faster. But thank you so much for your time. Do appreciate it this afternoon. That is Khaya Sithole, a political and economic analyst.